5:32, so we might want to get going.
Okay.
Let people in.
Yep. Admit all. Here they come. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome. Feel free to turn your camera on and wave and say hi. It's nice to see everybody's faces again, too.
For sure.
Don't mind me. I'm going to turn my camera and microphone off because I'm eating dinner and you guys don't want to watch me eat a chimichanga, but I'm here.
Sounds good,
Hey,
actually.
it's Betsy. I'm having my dinner too, so I'll put myself on mute. Nice
Hi,
to see
Betsy.
you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, so much for joining us.
I don't know why my video is not working, but you don't need to see me.
Dinner too, so hi, and I will come back when I'm done eating dinner, but I'm still on.
We need to like include dinner deliveries with this, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, hi, everybody, and now my video won't work. Hi, Kathy.
Hi. Nice to see everybody.
So nice to see everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm super excited to hear more about this beluga.
Is he still around?
Cindy?
I didn't think so.
No, well, I don't remember what day the last report was, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
There were a few possible reports that were never confirmed, so.
14 was
Did you see the weird one or hear about the weird one in near Burroughs?
that wasn't confirmed. at all.
Oh,
Right, I just chimed in. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
This is Howard. Yeah, the last confirmed report, or at least reliable, was October 14th. And that was heading out Admiralty. And noteworthy about that was that beluga was accompanying southern residents. We don't have a very good ID count of which southern residents, but they had been in Puget Sound. And as they left, starting from somewhere around, I don't know, Seattle, Golden Gardens, the beluga kind of tagged along a mile or two away. It never joined right in, but accompanied just, step by step all the way up Admiralty Inlet. So that was October 14th. And there have been only a couple of very sketchy reports, not really reliable, followed up or confirmed since then. So we don't know if the beluga may be still around, but seems to have departed.
Awesome. Thanks, Howie.
Sure.
Good to see you.
Yeah, hi. I will now stop my video because I'm having dinner too.
Whitney, you want to do your question for everyone now? Is that a good time?
Yeah, I do. And feel free to munch. And if you want to munch and include your answer and your responses in the chat box, that sounds great. And you can also just speak up. And we want to make this just a fun way to connect and to get to know one another. So we have some fun icebreaker questions. I'll go ahead and type it in the chat box now. And the questions are, have you ever seen a beluga in the wild yourself? And if so, where? And if not a beluga, what other unusual or rare sightings have you ever had and experienced? And please share about those.
The better question is, did anyone see the beluga in Puget Sound here, right? I wonder.
I only saw it on the news broadcast.
Via helicopter.
Ah, I'm gonna read a couple of things in the chat box. Jill said that she saw them up in Alaska, so that's really exciting. And 2 humpbacks with the T-123s from TISA. That's amazing. Oh, Janice says, I kayaked with hundreds of them in Churchill, is that Manitoba? Please speak up. I want to hear more about that.
This isn't a sighting, but I happened to be on like the Orca Sound hydrophone that night that the sperm whale came through. So I feel like that kind of counts.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I thought that the helicopter footage was just incredible. And I was watching live and felt like I was, you know, there for this moment where you're watching this just unusual sighting and the footage is just crystal clear and beautiful. You really feel like you're there and that you're experiencing that moment, you know, with everyone else. So yeah, I know that the drone footage can really go a long way in making a powerful impact on the public. So even if you're not there, like watching on your phone can really be a big deal.
Can I share an experience that I had? This was not with a wild beluga whale, but I grew up in New York, and I was at the Brooklyn Aquarium when I was, I don't know, in my young 20s, and they had belugas in captivity there. So before I knew that that was a horrible thing, I was near a pen where they were holding one, and I was with my nieces. And this beluga whale was swimming past me, and there was like a window there, and it would stop and really look at me and then go back and really look at me. And then it went up to the top of the tank and totally soaked me to the skin, and then came down to the window and went like this. I got you. And my nieces were like, oh my God, Aunt Maureen, that whale just laughed at you. So that was a really, really special moment. And so I've always had an affinity for them since then. I love cetaceans. And I've lived in Hawaii, so I've been around a lot of whales. And now I live in the middle of the country, so I'm not exposed very often. So I'm so glad you all are doing what you're doing and that you care. So thank you. And thank you for letting me share that fun experience.
Yeah, sort of the beauty of all this virtual pandemicness is that we can connect from all over the world and zoom in and zoom all over the world, no matter where we are. So it's exciting to have all of you here today. I'm seeing lots more sightings come in the chat box of fin whales and narwhal. I didn't see the beluga here in Puget Sound except for on the helicopter footage, but I did go to Alaska once, and I sat outside on the shore and looked at a park where supposedly you can see them from shore. It almost kind of sounded like lime kiln, but no luck. But it was a beautiful spot to hang out. So maybe someday.
Several people
Jill, I
mentioned
want to hear about. Go ahead, Mom.
Taloop in the chat too. I would have thought that'd be the only white whale we would see in the Salish Sea, but he didn't hold that record for very long with the beluga showing up. But that was definitely a rare sighting for people who were lucky enough to see him.
Jill, can you tell us more about your sighting?
I'm assuming you mean Jill Hine, not Jill Clogston.
Oh, who? Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
I've been lucky to see a lot of whales. I've seen southern right whales and a narwhal up by Baffin Island, and bowhead whales up there also, and blues and fin. I've seen 13 different kinds of whales. Wow. So, and I'd like to see more. There's still a few I want to see. The only big whale I've ever seen is the cuviers. And anyway, so I've got plenty of time to travel. I want to go further.
Okay, Jill, is there like a specific whale that is at the top of your must-see list?
Oh, Bowhead Whale. And I have to say that because we're probably about 20 on the edge of the ice and we're about 20 feet from them, and I could have actually leaned over and touched it. They're just huge and beautiful and gorgeous. Just, I wanted to see a blue whale too, which I've seen too in the Sea of Cortez, and they are just huge, absolutely huge. I don't know, they're all great. But a narwhal, I didn't get a really good look at a narwhal. That was up by Baffin Island, and you know, I've got flukes, and you could see under the water the male's tooth, but it wasn't. I would like to have seen it a little bit better, so I might have to go back up there and see if we can get a better look. I don't know.
I'll go with you. Count me in.
Okay, I'll set up a trip. Okay.
Okay.
Camping on the ice floe.
Oh, yeah.
Cindy, do you want to throw your question out, or do you want to get started?
Up to you. I can throw one last one in there while we kind of get ready to share our PowerPoint. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, so this question I will put in the chat, but it's, how many times in the last year did you drop what you were doing and or abandon adult responsibilities because of a whale report?
How many thousand?
And I can't answer that one because I can't remember. There were so many.
Yeah, all of September while the Southern residents were here, I did nothing adult.
And pretty much every weekend in April too.
Yeah, they had a Saturday thing going there for a while, didn't they?
They did.
I love watching the chat.
If it's too many, that means life is good.
That's right.
Back in the day in the fall, I used to like clear my calendar during daylight hours and try to like schedule things to be like at like 5, 6 o'clock, like right now when it's too dark anyway. But I've fallen out of that practice, but it was pretty good, you know, or trying to like stay like 1 or 2 days ahead on, you know, adult responsibilities and then be ready to go at a moment's notice.
Have the car all packed with your snack and your water and your jacket and your hat and everything else, and just hear the whale call and gone straight to the car. Oh, the camera too.
The camera's got to just be sitting right by the door so you can grab it as you run out.
That's great. I love reading all those stories. All right, I think that's a good time to begin. 5:45, we're going to do a brief introduction about our program, but we want to thank you guys for joining us here tonight. You'll hear a little bit from myself. I'm Amy Eberling. I'm the director of the Salish Sea School, and we're located in Anacortes. Cindy and Whitney, Monica, do you just want to introduce yourselves real quick, your name and your organization?
Sure, I'm Cindy Hansen, Education and Advocacy Coordinator for Orca Network.
And I'm Whitney Negebauer, and I'm the director of Whale Scout, or based in Bothell, Washington.
And I'm Monica Whelan Shields, the director of the Orca Behavior Institute based on San Juan Island, Washington.
Awesome. So what is the Pulse? This is our launch night. We thought we'd, if nothing else, get everyone together and just enjoy the community. So thanks for those 15 minutes of sharing stories and the love of whales. But we decided to launch an education program that's virtual. So again, it was a benefit of COVID that led us to want to reach out to anyone and all parties across the country and maybe even the world if the time zone works out. So we hope to bring you guys once a month really cool programs that not only inform you guys about what's going on, but hear from current researchers that are in the field working with the different species that really, you know, work towards a healthier Salish Sea. So we hope, number 2, to connect you guys with these scientists and experts so you guys can ask them questions at the end of their talk and have just, kind of like a fireside chat, conversation, very informal. And then number 3, we really miss those in-person gatherings and whale discussions, but we thought in the beginning, like we logged on here in the beginning to talk and just kind of talk about our amazing experiences. We hope to connect people. So anyone that's passionate about the environment, the marine world, or just wants to learn, that's kind of our goal here. So all those 3 things are what we hope to bring and produce with the Pulse. And I'm gonna hand it to Whitney.
Yeah, so how does it work? Well, you're here at our launch event, so you're already on the right track. So the first step is that we have an enrollment, and it's on the website. We will include a link to that in the chat box. And we're offering an early bird special of $105. And what it gets you is access to 12 talks, one every month on the second Wednesday of the month. And like Amy said, it includes a pre-lecture happy hour, social time. All of the talks we will go over in a moment. We also left room on purpose within the schedule for hot topics because things come up like this beluga, and we want to be able to reach out to an expert and learn about it right away because these things are timely and there's a lot of interest in them. And so we want to give a little bit of flexibility in the schedule to have that opportunity. And after attending all the talks or watching recordings, should you miss one, you'll have the opportunity to get certified at the end of the year. And you can recertify every single year, and we'll have new topics every year. So it's very, very exciting. You can give a membership to the Pulse as a gift if you would like. Your holiday season is just around the corner. You can gift it to yourself as an investment in yourself and your own education. And also scholarships are available. So be sure to check those out. There are deadlines in December. And so be sure to check those out. And we're happy to include those as well.
Okay, so why do you want to sign up for the Pulse? There are a lot of great reasons to do this program. We are actually trying to get clock hours for this program. So if any of you are teachers and are doing clock hours through Washington State, this program should be able to qualify for that. We're in the process of getting that set up right now. So if anybody is interested in that, feel free to reach out to us and we can give you more information on how to do that. So it's great to have on your resume that you have all of this education behind you. You can expand your knowledge. A lot of great topics and speakers that we have scheduled, and you'll learn about those in just a moment. And we are planning a boat trip in October of 2022 for those of you who are interested in doing that. So we'll have some more information on that coming up sometime soon as well. So lots of great perks for signing up for the Pulse.
So here is a quick look at our schedule of speakers for 2022. We're really excited about the diversity of topics that we'll be covering and the people that we'll get the chance to connect with. We really want this to be kind of an ecosystem-wide continuing education program. So it'll focus on everything from the whales, all the way down the food chain to the toxins in the environment, stormwater, everything, on the human side of things as well, including tribal connections and climate change. So really be kind of broad in scope, and the plan will be to focus on different topics from year to year. As Whitney mentioned, we do have a couple of hot topic months scheduled, so we can cover current events that come up. But just a quick run through, we'll kick the year off with a bang by hearing about Southern residents of the past that maybe we didn't get a chance to meet with Dave Ellifrit of the Center for Whale Research. Then we'll be covering sharks of the Salish Sea, tribal connections, tufted puffins, Tire chemicals, you may have heard about that recent study in stormwater with implications for salmon. Harbor porpoise, climate change with a focus on the Salish Sea. We have a couple of potential speakers we're speaking to for another salmon related talk, so that one's to be determined. And then also forage fish, local geology, and ending the year with another hot topic. And then the fees that you pay to attend this course will not only provide an honorarium for the speakers to help honor their time, but will support the 4 nonprofits that are sponsoring this event tonight and have come together to give you the pulse. And we are a diverse group of organizations, but I think really complementary, where we work in different aspects of research and advocacy and education, including educating children and adults alike. And we all kind of have different programs, but we all have the very same values and same mission in terms of better understanding and supporting the health and recovery of the Salish Sea ecosystem. I did see a couple of questions in the chat. We will be recording talks, so if you do miss one, you'll have the opportunity to watch it and make that up later on. Another question is, what will you be certified in? Somebody else want to handle that one?
Yeah, I think our goal with this new certification process is to really create something where you guys can become certified in what we'll call the Pulse certification and be recognized by more organizations or schools that see it. But since it's new now, it really means nothing to anyone else. But our goal is you can walk out of this program on month 12 and really be able to teach others. If you're a marine naturalist or looking for a job on a boat, or even in your classroom, you can teach your students about the species that rely on the Salish Sea or the Salish Sea ecosystem, or tell your neighbors more about it. So it's nothing, official per se, but the overall goal is for it to be recognized down the road, and for people to be like, oh, that's cool. You've done a great job with, encompassing the entire ecosystem, learning about it.
And this
any other questions?
Really, we're creating in part because it's something that we want to participate in too, and we want to learn about. And so it's really built for all of us and can grow and evolve based on what people are interested in. We've thrown out some different ideas, such as maybe people want to host watch parties in different areas where a few people who are taking it together and live in the same community can watch together and participate in kind of the social hour ahead of time as a group. We're hoping that things like the boat trip can become a fun event to look forward to, where we can connect in person again, and potentially hosting volunteer events where we can get together as a community as well. So it's really not just about the continuing education aspect of it, but also reconnecting as a community and building those connections of all of us who have those same interests and passions. Another question in the chat is, will there be an option to select 1 or 2, or do you have to sign up for the whole thing?
Amy, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Right now, we are encouraging people to sign up for the whole year of the Pulse. So we are playing around with the idea of signing up for 1 or 2 per month, but as a team, we met and talked about that. So if you have suggestions about that, we're all ears and happy to pivot or evolve as your comments and suggestions come in.
Yeah, really, one of the main ideas was that we want to focus on ecosystem-wide education. And so, people might be working in a specific aspect of the ecosystem, but as we know, everything's all connected. And so we really think the talks will kind of build off each other and connect us all to important information. So for now, we're really looking to encourage people to sign up for the whole program.
There's another question in the chat box saying that, you know, I don't live in the area. Can I still sign up? And yes, absolutely. In fact, there is a scholarship that is specifically targeted at people who do not live directly in the Salish Sea region, because saving the Salish Sea is a massive project, and it's going to take all of us, and having voices out there that are advocating for the Salish Sea that are, you know, on the eastern part of the state or beyond is really important. So yes.
I don't see this question in the chat, but one that somebody else had asked me offline was, do you have to be a working professional in the field to take part of this? And absolutely not. This is you know, a great tool for people who are working as naturalists or educators, but really anybody who's a nature enthusiast or just wants to learn more about the Salish Sea, this program is for you too. So there really isn't any pre-qualification required other than the desire to learn and connect with other naturalists and scientists throughout the region.
Yeah, what I love about it is it's just a fun way to take a deep dive into all of these topics and to keep up with the pulse of the Salish Sea, to keep up with what's going on in a really fun way. So I'll stop there, but I'm really excited about it.
I guess one thing that we didn't mention was that this won't be kind of an introductory course. It's really designed to build off of, you know, kind of a basic understanding of, you know, using the killer whale example, what's a southern resident, what's a Biggs killer whale, you know, it's going to be a deeper dive than that, like Whitney said. So the idea is that you'll really have kind of a you know, a very basic understanding, but we're going to ask our speakers to sort of start one level above that and take a deeper dive on some of these topics. So that's one thing we think will really set this program apart.
And I want to say, I'm just super excited for the community feel. That's kind of the goal here, is to hop on and learn together, ask questions. If you guys have suggestions for speakers for 2023, we'd love to hear them. And then the hot topic nights, I think they're going to be a lot of fun. Kind of like tonight, Stephanie, thank you for hopping on here and sharing this information. But something new and strange or weird or different in the Salish Sea, you'll be able to hop on and we'll be like a WTF and talk all about that. So I'm excited for that. So Cindy, do you want to go ahead with the introduction to Stephanie?
Sure, I would love to. So I want to thank Stephanie so much for joining us today for our launch of the Pulse of the Salish Sea. So we have her bio up here. I'm going to kind of paraphrase that and read part of it for you. And then we'll have Stephanie come and talk to us about belugas, which we're really excited about. So Dr. Stephanie Norman is a wildlife veterinarian and epidemiologist involved in the aquatic animal health field. She earned her veterinary degree from Texas A&M University, an MS in epidemiology from the University of Washington, and a PhD in wildlife epidemiology at UC Davis. She is specifically interested in understanding and interpreting ocean health, including pathogen transmission in the aquatic environment, as well as those of concern to human health. Her research efforts help provide knowledge needed to mitigate human impacts on aquatic species and raise awareness of ocean health and the connection to human health. And this evening, Stephanie will be talking to us about the natural history of beluga whales, including life history, habitat, reproduction, and feeding. She will briefly discuss the endangered Cook Inlet beluga population in South Central Alaska. And lastly, the lone beluga whale visitor to the Salish Sea. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephanie Norman.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. So let me just take a second here to share my screen, and I'm going to do this so that I can, let's see, let me get this going here. Okay, so everybody can see the title, and let me just adjust it real quick. There we go. Everybody's such a professional at Zoom now after tons and tons and tons of meetings. Okay, so Any problems, just send me a little hand up or something so I can, if there's some issue with the presentation. Well, so as Cindy said, I'm a veterinarian. I've been with the stranding network here in the Northwest, I would say probably going on 20 years, and have worked a lot with Orca Network and several other partners around in Puget Sound and the Salish Sea, and also throughout the West Coast, particularly when we have unusual mortality events where we have a large number of animals that die that is above and beyond what we would consider a normal baseline. So this is a topic, you know, belugas and the Salish Sea. I never in my wildest dreams, if I came here 20 years ago, if someone would have said, oh, you're gonna be talking about a beluga and the Salish Sea, I never would have thought I'd be talking about this species here in the Northwest. I've actually worked, most of my PhD work at UC Davis was involving beluga whales, but these were up in Alaska. And part of the studies I did were focused on two different populations. One is the endangered cook-inlet beluga, and I'll explain a little bit later why I want to present particularly on that population. And then the other one was the Bristol Bay, which is on the other side of the peninsula of, the west side of the peninsula of Alaska in Bristol Bay. So it's been probably a few years since I've actually been out with the belugas, but they're really amazing creatures, very odd. And so we'll get started and talk a little bit about where they fit into the classification. So, we know animal and they're mammals, and then we know they're part of the order of Cetacea instead of Pinnipedia, which are the seals and sea lions. They are interestingly categorized in the family Monodontidae. So mono just means one, and then donta is tooth. So they are grouped in with the narwhals, who indeed tend to have this one, strange spire that comes out of their face, which is actually one of their teeth. However, these guys, I don't know why they put them in, they call them Monodontidae, because they really don't have one tooth. They have many, as we'll see. But anyway, so their genus is Delphinapteris, and Lucus, which means white in Latin. So it's pretty fitting for these animals. I'm going to talk about just some general features about these guys, and sort of what they look like and what's peculiar about them. They have a very pronounced rostrum or beak. Oh, I'm sorry, they lack a pronounced rostrum or beak. So for instance, you look at a bottlenose dolphin, they have a very distinct looking beak built that comes out, looks like a bottle. And then you have the orcas, which really lack any type of distinctive protuberance coming off of the front of their face. But when they said that the belugas lack this, I would say I would like to differ a little bit, because to me, they have like kind of intermediate between orcas and bottlenose dolphin. They do have a little bit of distinctive rostrum here. In fact, this guy looks like a duck in a way. So they do have it a little bit, but just not as developed. So the top of their head is characterized by a very round globe-like melon, and it's very flexible. As you can see by this photo here, this is actually part of a video clip, a short video clip, just to gently demonstrate. She wasn't pushing too hard on this guy, but just to show that it's very flexible, the melon, and underneath it, it has the fats, the oils in there that help focus and modulate their vocalizations, including echolocation clicks. So when they send out a call, it helps focus out through it's like a cone beam out through their melon. It's focused onto whatever the target is. And then when it comes back through the jaws, the reflection of the sound is picked up through the jaws. So they have a really good capability of focusing their vocalizations through this giant melon. They are a toothed whale, and they possess anywhere from around 18 to 20 teeth in both the upper and lower jaws. So for a total of around 36 to 40. So you can see why I think the Monodontidae classification is kind of a misnomer, but they do have lots of teeth. Let's see, let me scoot this over because it won't let me turn. Okay. My little slide is slow. Hang on one second. My slide seems to have frozen. Hang on one second, guys. Let me see if I can get it to, okay, there we go. So you can see over time where you know, you probably have seen these Airbuses, and when they first were developed, because these airplanes transport parts of airplanes where they're going to be assembled. And so I think someone just probably looked at it one day and said, you know what this reminds me of? Kind of this beluga whale, sort of the same feature. And even here they've gotten a little bit, you know, cheeky, and they've put on a little smile and an eye. And so they even named it beluga. So I thought it was kind of funny because they do indeed kind of look like this strange whale. But I think the ships are, I don't know, they're really weird looking. But anyway, you can see kind of where they got their name. So I think the thing's a little bit slow here. Sorry about this. I'm having a little issue with trying to fast forward these slides. Okay, so the genus name Delphinapteris really translates to a dolphin without a fin. So that's what that means. And so instead of having a dorsal fin like, say, a killer whale has, it only has a ridge. And so the ridge is a tough cartilaginous, you can see by the yellow arrow here, it's just a very firm ridge is what essentially it is. And what they do with that is it allows them to swim really freely under the ice flows, which are just sheets of floating ice, because these animals, as we'll see in a minute, where they live, it's often covered with ice much of the year. So this allows them to get in there, which, unlike, say, a killer whale, would be really difficult for them to go. I mean, killer whales do live up, you know, in colder areas where there's ice, but their ability to get in and around the ice is a little bit more prohibited than, say, for a beluga whale. So unlike other whales and dolphins, the neck vertebra of belugas are not fused. So their first C1 through C7, so I mean cervical vertebra 1 through 7 are not fused. So they're able to turn their heads, and I'll show you some other pictures in a minute, what that looks like. It's kind of very unusual. There's very particular to this group of animals. But you can see this middle photo, this ridge, it's very distinctive. So this helps them break the ice. They can push up into that ice, that they can, you know, push up in there and get breathing holes. The other thing is that they really have a huge blubber layer that keeps them warm in the Arctic waters, and of course helps them store energy. Some beluga populations will even shed their outer skin during the summer. It's an annual molt where they just get rid of some of that yucky yellow, old yellowed skin, and they'll rub up against coarse gravel. And sometimes they can even rub up against the ice flows and just scratch that off and come up with a brand new white coat or white epidermis layer. So to put their size in perspective, they can get pretty big. When we were doing captures, I'm only 5'3". So when we were doing captures on belugas in Bristol Bay, we were doing health assessments of them, and we would catch and then release them after, you know, just having them about 45 minutes to just do some sampling health assessments. But they would come up to my waist, and of course I was sinking in the mud a little bit, but you can see at least this is sort of a representation of an adult male human in comparison to the size of these belugas. I mean, they are, and I'll show you a picture of one that was actually caught by the Native Americans up in Alaska, so you can get a better appreciation of size, but the males can get really, really big. The weight, as you can see by this Pillsbury doughboy, they can get up to around 3,000 pounds. And this is really important for them up in the Arctic, because you've got to keep in mind that they're pretty circumpolar animals. And so they don't really get a chance to eat, you know, really high fat, rich nutrient content fish. So they have a very small window. So these guys have to bulk up pretty heavily and to be able to survive, because sometimes the food gets to be, it's, you know, slim pickings through the winter time. So they do get pretty big, but you can see this guy has bent his head sort of forward. So in a killer whale, that beak here would be facing straight up. So it wouldn't be, you know, he wouldn't be just sitting there looking forward at you when he's bobbing in the water. And belugas, they have this very interesting, I call them pontoons. Sometimes they're called paddles. And what they are is these are depositions of fat, probably a little bit of, you know, what am I trying to say, the little bit of collagen framework in there, but it's maybe hard to tell how this is positioned. So this is the bottom of the beluga whale, And then here's the dorsal ridge. And so what we're looking at is this pontoon on the side. And then this is a whale that's, the bottom picture is a whale on the left side. This is his pec fin sticking up, his head's up here, tail flukes are down here. And so he's got this big ridge on the side. Now, when we were in Alaska, these things would get really big. I mean, it looks like a pontoon boat, something that you would see like on Lake Havasu in Arizona, the big, air mattress things, or like a inflatable boat that you would take out. So, this publication in 2012, they came up with some theories, hypothesized that possibly these could serve as some controls to help during locomotion, especially if the animals are rolling or turning, or if they're partly inverted position. But I would say, I mean, sure, that's probably part of that, but I would say this is really a big area where they deposit fat too. So perhaps it does dual function, but it's just kind of an interesting thing that you don't see in other species. And another thing about this about the beluga whales is they do, if you were to look at them on a cross section, just, do like a CT scan, look at them cross section, they would sort of look like this rounded, gently rounded triangle shape with the bottom here kind of flattened. And here you can see on this, the beluga, the ventral side of here, is that it's very flattened compared to, say, like a killer whale, which might be more rounded, or even a bottlenose dolphin. But what that does is it allows these guys to strand on high tides. And sometimes they will do that, and they'll just sit and wait for the next tide cycle. And I'll explain more about why they end up in these shallow waters so often. But when they do strand, it's not always a lethal event. Often they'll just have several in a group, and they will feed, and then the tide will go out. But it allows them to at least to be able to stay more upright than they would if they were more rounded and couldn't balance. And also these pec fins, like in orcas, they tend to point downward, so down beyond the bottom of the animal. So there are these big giant paddles. But if you were to get an orca on its belly in the sand, its pec fins are not really built to be for an animal to be laying on its flat belly. Whereas the beluga whales, their little pec fins are actually flat and kind of stick out more sideways, so that they can sit out on the sand if they need to. In fact, here's a mom and a calf, and her pec fin is way up here. So it's not as if it's preventing her from being able to lay on her belly. So here's some of these shots of the ability to bend its neck, particularly this one here. This is a good shot of that pontoon, the lateral deposition of fat, possibly a rudder. This also shows you the flat, short length of the pec fin compared to, say, a killer whale or any other species. They're very flexible, and here's one on its back, and again, it's bending its head in an unusual way. So it's just a neat ability. Why they have that ability, don't know, because there are other species that live up in the Arctic, like the narwhal. I mean, it's just a bullet. It can't really do anything. So, which is hard because they've got this long tooth sticking out. So why the belugas have this ability, I don't think anyone really knows. Maybe someone will do a study and find out. So now they're very social animals. They do return to their birth areas each summer to feed and give birth. Groups can range anywhere from 1 to 2 animals to several hundred whales. Now, unlike killer whales, individuals will move between groups within these populations. So, the killer whales tend to have more of a strong bond, ties within their maternal led pod. So they may maybe go out and investigate, but always come back to that maternal pod. Beluga whales aren't tied to their maternal pods. In fact, they don't really have maternal pods. They may have leaders of the groups, but they will have flow. Individuals will flow between groups, move from one to the other. So it's a little bit different in that aspect from some of the other large odontocetes. Interestingly, these guys can live a long time. Now, we don't tend to see this length in captive animals. They tend to be more along the lines of 30 to 50 years, but I don't think I've ever seen one that's even lived to 50 years. But they are long-lived in the wild. They tend to mate. Well, we think they tend to mate in late winter and spring. So depending on the population, this can occur during migration or in their wintering grounds. The females will tend to reach sexual maturity when they are around 6 to 14 years of age, and the males are when they're slightly older. Now, this can vary between the different populations, and but this is just sort of average what we get across the different groups of belugas. Pregnancy tends to last about 15 months, and it's they're very long gestational periods, as are the nursing periods. In fact, they can last up to 2 years, sometimes 2.5 years. And so the female can be pregnant with her birthing interval, and say an average age female reproductive age, she can be having every 2 to 3 years. It depends on what her nutritional status is, what the conditions of the environment are, how well her other calf's doing. So she can often be pregnant with one calf and then still be nursing another one. But usually by the time that calf that she's pregnant with is born, the presently nursing calf will have finally weaned. Interestingly, well, let's see, so they'll give birth in warmer waters. And I say warmer, again, remember this is all relative because these are animals that live in cold climates. So versus, the water can be, instead of 32 degrees, it may be 52 degrees, which is still pretty darn cold, but the calves they tend to benefit from that warmer water, and also in shallower tide flats and estuaries. So one of the reasons we tend to find them sometimes stranded out of the water, that's where the calves are living, are becoming stronger. And so moms tend to focus in groups. It also keeps them away from predators such as killer whales that may try to feed prey on these little calves. And speaking of calves, they are typically born dark, or like a dark, not quite black, but pretty dark charcoal black or gray, or even a light gray. And then they tend to lighten as they mature. And finally, when they reach sexual maturity, they'll be finally completely white. And here's just examples of the contrast between the calves and the mother. And interestingly, on this little guy, you can actually see the fetal folds. So this is a pretty new calf, just days old, and eventually these folds will flatten out. They are, pretty good swimmers right away. They don't have a lot of blubber on them yet, of course, so they're not going to be as buoyant. So sometimes mom will carry them along on her back just to help them save a little bit of energy. But they, are very similar to other types of cetacean calves in how they behave. Now, what we know about their distribution has been, I would say, probably, at least in the early days, some of the best information and data that we have has come from traditional ecological knowledge. So in other words, this is from Native tribes, Native Americans that have lived with these animals, have depended on them for millennia for food and cultural importance. Also opportunistic sightings, such as, for instance, the one we have in the Salish Sea. Also personal accounts where we may have fishermen that go out and they're fishing and they said, hey, yes, we've seen belugas, because they're pretty distinctive. I mean, they're white, not hard to miss unless, it's really choppy water. There have also been dedicated aerial surveys that have been done by managing agencies. So for the United States, it's been the National Marine Fisheries Service that they'll go out and they used to do, at least for Cook Inlet, which is the endangered population up in Alaska. They've done them every year. And for other populations that are not endangered, they tend to, several years may pass between aerial survey counts. Also tagging, we've been able to find out where these animals go, particularly with the new tags, the newer generation tags that have satellite information. They have depth recordings on it. They can gather all kinds of oceanographic information and put them on the belugas short term and see where they go. And that helps us define better where those habitat needs are and what's critical habitat. And then from there, we can do habitat modeling, where we can say, okay, if they go here, that means they probably also go here. And that's really important when you have an endangered population of really any animal, where you're trying to find that critical habitat to try to protect them. So that's where we get most of our information. But I would say that it started out, the first one, number one, was probably where most of it came from in the early days of studying these animals. So here's a map, just looking down on the North Pole, so from space, and they're found in the Arctic and subarctic waters. Here we are in Seattle at the very bottom of the map, and then Alaska's up in here. And anything that's dark blue is the range of belugas, and there are different populations. They are genetically different around the globe, and they are found along the coastlines of Alaska, Russia, the Scandinavian countries, Greenland, and Canada. And they're typically found in coastal waters during the summer months, often in very shallow water, as I alluded to earlier, because this is where they can give birth to calves. Often river deltas, as the salmon are coming in, are in shallow water. They can avoid predators, killer whales, for instance. During other seasons, though, they can be found in deeper waters and have been known to dive up to 1,000 meters for periods of up to 25 minutes, and that's up to 3,000 feet. And that's pretty darn deep. They swim around among the ice flows in the Arctic and subarctic waters, where temperatures can get as low as 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius. And they also seasonally inhabit estuaries and these river deltas I just mentioned to feed on fish runs. And so interestingly, this population is really suited to both cold ocean habitats as well as relatively fresh, warmer freshwater habitats. They don't necessarily spend all their time in the rivers, freshwater rivers, but up in Alaska, in Cook Inlet, they will go up quite a ways up some of these tributaries of freshwater looking for food. So they won't spend, months and months there, but they will venture in and then come back out to salt water. So they can kind of go easily between shallow estuaries and then also deeper ocean water. So what do these guys eat? And I'm kind of like making a joke with the pizza up in the upper left. I just found that picture and I thought it was pretty funny, but it kind of is true in a way, because they eat almost everything. So they are not super selective, except under certain conditions, and I'll explain those in a minute. But they have a varied diet consisting of, octopus, squid, they eat crabs, they eat shrimp, they'll eat snails, these sandworms, they'll eat cod, a variety of fish, including cod, flatfish, salmon. And these interesting fish in the middle, they are called eulachon or candlefish. So this top picture here, smack in the middle of the screen, is sort of what they look like after. These are found in Alaska and other waters, other cold Pacific waters. But the reason they're called candlefish is because back before electricity really came onto the picture, native communities would dry these out. And because they have such a high oil content, they would literally burn them as candles to provide light. So these are our eulachon, and they are facing some problems in Alaska. I'll talk about them more when we talk about the Cook Inlet belugas. So, we have really high oily, the salmon and the eulachon and the herring, really oily, dense fish that these animals depend on to get those big blubber stores that we saw in order to make it through the winter and fall, because things like shrimp are great, crab, but they really don't have that high nutrient content they need to put on that blubber layer. And so they really take advantage of whatever they can get. But in the summertime, they tend to be more selective depending on where they live in the world and what's available. So in Alaska, as we'll talk about, salmon are big time, and so are the eulachon, are really super important. Cod are great, but their overall oil content is not nearly what it is for salmon or for eulachon. Yeah, cods have fatty livers, but the rest of their meat is not what we consider a heavy oily. Like eat a light white meat, you typically eat cod. If you want something heavier, oilier, you eat salmon or herring. So here's a picture of the beluga I was telling you about to sort of put in perspective the size. They are big animals. I think the picture back there with the cartoon scuba might have been a little bit out of proportion. I think that the person could have been a little bit bigger. I mean, they are big animals. They're long. This is an adult animal that was caught, but the native populations of the Arctic in Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Russia, they do hunt belugas for both consumption and profit. For instance, they'll have these scrimshaw on the bones, the jaws of belugas that they can sell. And they're also a very important cultural icon for these communities that depend on them. And particularly the native peoples of North America and Russia have hunted these belugas for many centuries. And they also, unfortunately, were hunted by non-natives during the 19th century and part of the early 20th century. So the one thing that is unfortunate about the hunting of these smaller cetaceans is they're generally not controlled or guided or supervised by the International Whaling Commission, which does oversee, does advise on large whale hunting. So it's each country is really essentially develops its own regulations in differing years. So currently, right now, some Inuit in Canada and Greenland and Alaska Native groups and Russians are allowed to hunt belugas for consumption as well as for sale, because again, as I mentioned, Aboriginal whaling is also excluded from the International Whaling Commission, which had the 1986 moratorium on hunting of large whales. So Aboriginal whaling is not covered, and neither really is small cetacean whaling. So the IWC, as it's called, really is an international body that oversees that on the global stage, but that's for large whales, large baleen and sperm whales, those types of animals that are much larger. So some of the threats, really, I would say pretty much most of the beluga population, some more than others, really face similar types of threats. And you'll recognize some of these that are similar threats to the orcas in Puget Sound. Habitat degradation is always a concern, particularly in heavily populated areas. So we have the orcas in Puget Sound. They're surrounded by busy cities. The same thing in Cook Inlet, which I'll talk about in a minute. They are in a similar situation. Also, the endangered belugas in the St. Lawrence estuary in Canada. Contaminants are also very, very important to consider. The St. Lawrence beluga population suffered for decades, very high incidence of cancers that were highly suspected to be affiliated or associated or at least influenced by contaminant levels that were really high in the belugas in St. Lawrence Riverway. And it's a very industrialized area. It's a very populated area. So there have been steps to try to address this, and they are succeeding to a degree. So I think it's something that really is a problem worldwide, but this is just something that, when these animals live in an area that's very, very populated, they're going to face, habitat degradation, contaminants, and of course, prey limitation. It all should sound very familiar for people who work on the orca issues. Strandings. This is more of like if you get a really large group of animals that maybe are scared into the flats and cannot get out, or they get up high enough where the tide does not come back. The tidal flats in some of these northern areas of the world are very extreme. And so you can be, this is a danger for not only the animals, but also for people who go out, say, clam shelling or clam collecting, clam digging. You have to always be aware of the tides, because they can leave you high and dry, or they can come in pretty quickly and cause problems that way. Certainly ocean noise is a great big problem for many of our cetacean populations around the world. And then of course, climate change, which is kind of understood with everywhere also. So, some of these are a little bit easier to pinpoint and to target studies on. Some of them are not, because they're more generalized. So climate change, yes, we know certain things caused it, but how to begin to untangle a complex problem like that. So, and as you know, you probably read something in the news at least every other week, or if not weekly, about cities that are, communities that are going underwater because of melting ice up north. The extremes of climate change are felt more acutely at the northern poles, the northern extremes, because of the way they're situated on the globe. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Alaska, and because it's going to allude to the whale that we had in Puget Sound. Right now, well, the recognized stocks are 5 that are recognized in Alaska, and you can see in the purple, they kind of circle around. But the one that is endangered is the Cook Inlet. So it has a population right now around 370, kind of vacillates between, 350 and 380. But again, I'll show you the next a couple of slides how their numbers plummeted over time. The rest of them are run anywhere from, like, Bristol Bay was the other group that I worked on on the left side, the west side of the peninsula. They number around 2,000, maybe 2,500. The Eastern Beaufort Sea stock on the northern part of Canada that borders Alaska, they run around 40,000. So the only one that's really in trouble right now acutely is Cook Inlet. But again, with climate change and sea ice melting, we just don't know what's going to happen with these other stocks. So here's a view of Cook Inlet. It's a very beautiful area. It's an estuary, very large, and it's bordered at the northeast tip by Anchorage, which is the biggest city in the state. Now, the thing with this particular stock, the Cook Inlet beluga stock, is that they are geographically distinct and are isolated too. So they are not only just geographically isolated, but they are also genetically isolated. So they are not genetically related to the other stocks in Alaska. And because their numbers precipitate, I'll show in the next slide, they were listed as endangered in 2008 under the Endangered Species Act. The problem, though, is that they are continuing to decline. They've also experienced contraction of their range. So where they used to show, and I'll show you that too, some of the same high concern threats are noise. But interestingly, in their recovery plan, cumulative effects and natural disasters have been listed also as high concern. They do list pollution and prey reduction as other threats facing Cook Inlet belugas in the recovery plan put out by the National Marine Fisheries Service, but they don't really rank them very high, which I think that may change depending on what more studies show. But I think it's hard to be near a busy, highly populated city and not have some effect from pollution. But right now they're listed as more moderate concern, and the high is noise, natural disasters, and cumulative effects. But the plan does recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty that still exists, particularly regarding threats that are human or anthropogenic in origin. So, things will probably change as more data is gathered on these animals, and hopefully, make good, there'll be management decisions that help mediate some of those threats. So back in the, this map doesn't go all the way back to the 70s, but back in the 70s, the most accurate count they had of Cook Inlet belugas was estimated to be around 1,300 animals. Now they were being hunted at the time, and they were continuing, but back in the, I would say probably in the early to mid 90s, 80s and 90s, there was a really big precipitous drop. So imagine up here, there's 1,300 in the 70s, and it continues to drop. And then in early, it keeps going up here, a little peak up here, and then coming down even more. So we were at 1,300 back in the mid 70s, and now we're down to, in the mid 90s, we're down to about 350 animals. So what happened in 1999, there was an agreement in working with the native tribes, because what happened is there is a tribe called the Dialects in Cook Inlet that are historically the ones that have hunted these animals, have used them and for food and for cultural purposes. But during the 70s and 80s and 90s, there were other peoples from around, whether they were other tribes or other non-tribal people that came in and hunted these animals also. So there was a huge pressure on them from hunting. And so in 1999, in agreement with the Dialects, the National Marine Fisheries Service, they put a moratorium, at least to cut down the amount of hunting. And by 2000, there was, hunting had stopped. And I think 2005 was the last time a live an animal was taken. I think it was one beluga, maybe two. So really nothing since 2005. But what's happened is we've had these peaks and troughs since then. And I think that at the last count of 2020, after these aerial surveys, it was 279. I think I misspoke earlier and said 3 something, but it's been 279 was the median estimate. We're at the range of 250 to 317. So what's happened is the hunting pressure was released, that stopped. And so what was expected is there should have been a bounce back of Cook Inlet belugas. Well, there wasn't. So as you can see, it's just continued to kind of up and down, but has stayed a little bit above 300 for the past, 10, 15 years since hunting was ceased. And why that is, we don't know. And that's the $60 million question. And that's why there's a lot of work being done to figure out what's going on. So what they've done is they've done annual surveys in the northern, throughout the northern part of Cook Inlet, where they generally will search coastal areas anywhere from 3 to 5 times per year. But they would go like in the springtime, and they'd go back in the winter, the fall, the end of the summer to catch the calves that were not there present in the beginning of the spring. And they used to do these annually, but now they only do them every other year. So they've been able to come up with estimates. But these are just showing some of the track lines that they use. These are the rivers that they go up the freshwater river. Anchorage is right here. Okay, so here's south coming into Cook Inlet, coming up north. And then we have these big freshwater rivers and these big deltas where salmon come in up here. In fact, Alaska has the largest sockeye run in the world, pretty big run. And so these Cook Inlet belugas are definitely feeding on them quite often. And these are just an example of the plane and some of the equipment they use to do these surveys. So sightings are rarely visible now in the lower inlets. So again, here's Anchorage. They do see them every once in a while when they fly in the lower, but not really. It's kind of, it used to be all down in here, and I'll show you some maps showing that the shrinkage of the population or the range. But we do get sightings also from people that are walking along the rivers, and people that are out in boats, people doing other things on the water. And so this is an example of just a cumulative sighting locations of belugas that were seen across 5 different surveys in June 2005. There are also boat surveys that can go on here. So it's various ways to collect data on this. It just shows you some examples of some areas where they can show up. Now, this is where it gets most dramatic. So this is a mapping of beluga distribution in the 1970s. Again, here's Anchorage. So let me go back real quick and show you. So this was 2005. So again, we'll put like a mark. Here's this protuberance. I forget what point that is. And if you come forward, of course, it's not the same. This is more accurate, but it's further down. Oh no, here it is right here. So you can see that in 1970s, they were all through the upper Cook Inlet. And then the green shows a 90th percentile. So really what we're showing is the purple is where most of the animals spend their time, okay? And then the green added in 90th percentile. So we were able to capture at least 90%. And then the dots vary in size depending on how big the group is. And it's hard to tell from this, but you kind of get an appreciation of where they accumulate these river mouths. Now let's go to 1980s. Aha. So we'll go back to 70s. And immediately there's not only the number of dots, but where they're going. I mean, they're like disappeared. So let's move to the 1990s. And then we go to the 2000s. So this is where they have spent most of their time. We do not know, it is unknown what has caused them to crowd up there. So this is where they spend all year long. So let me go quickly back to the 70s. At least in the 70s, they used to kind of go up here during the summer to feed on the salmon and the Eulachon candlefish, and then they'd kind of disperse out. And then during the winter, they'd kind of look around for other foods. So there's different, they were moving around back and forth. Now in the 2000s, they only stay really jammed around Anchorage and these 2 arms, the Knik arm and then the Turnagain arm. Or sorry, Turnagain arms up here and then Knik arm. These are where the Cook Inlet goes into freshwater. So very, very dramatic. So why this was important when we found this whale in Puget Sound, because the big question was, is it one of these Cook Inlet animals? Because that was going to change everything on how we approached dealing with it. So that leads us into the video that started it all on October 3rd, and this should work here. This is the original video that was taken by the public citizen who came across this down in, it's supposed to work. Give it a second here to load. Okay. Well, it was working earlier. Let me try again. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, I just turned it off. So that was that video, and Howie and Susan received it, and then asked me, this is a beluga, right? And I'm like, oh yes. I mean, they're not hard to miss, and nothing else is that white. So this animal was located right here. Here's Tacoma Commencement Bay area, the Duwamish emptying out its lovely silt. So Commencement Bay, and that's the location of that animal. So, this was like, oh my goodness, it started a whole snowball of events and things that had to go into place to try to figure out, what is this, who is this animal? Where's it going? Is it okay? Who is it? And what happened is on the 7th of October, so that was the 3rd, that was on a Sunday, I believe, or Sunday. And so on the 3rd, which was the 7th, which was a Thursday, myself and all these folks here at the bottom that were part of different agencies, we went out in several boats out of Commencement Bay and tried to get all these different types of samples. So we wanted to get photo ID. There are, even though it's a white animal, you think, oh, how can you tell one plain white animal to another? There's a large photo ID project that goes on in Cook Inlet that they've been able to identify many of the animals in that population. So we try to get photo ID. You have to take it a certain way, a certain angle, both sides if you can. So we had someone doing photographs with, telephoto zoom lenses. We had 3 vets, myself and 2 of my colleagues were out there trying to do a health assessment. Obviously we can't grab the animals, so we try to do a visual health assessment. Do we see pontoons on the side? Do we see like an indentation in the blubber behind the head? So it looks like a peanut head? Does it look thin? Are there any injuries on it? So as much as we could try to get, visual health assessment, looking at its behavior. The difficulty with these guys, when you have one animal, like if you're up in Alaska, it's really good to work with the natives up there because they know the behaviors of each of these populations, and they're going to do certain things, go and travel certain places and visit certain locations. But this was a lone animal in a huge, Puget Sound and Salish Sea. So it was definitely demonstrating erratic kind of random travel, just go across one way, then go across the other, and then we go up here, and then we get the Orca network was telling us it's down here. But we definitely noticed it was drawn to busy locations. Now, whether it was because it was attracted to noise or because that's where the fish happened to be, or for whatever reason, we don't really know. But what we wanted to do was get a sample of something called eDNA from the water. So that stands for environmental DNA. And what the way that it works is, animals and like people, we shed skin. We have, particularly in animals that live in the water, they'll defecate. So they'll have, it's always got some slough tissues from inside the intestine, like little microscopic cells from the intestinal tract. So what they've been able to do with water collection samples, when an animal's passed through a section of water, we follow behind it. We put some bottles in the water. We get 2.5 liters of water. And then they goes back to the lab. So it went back to the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, NOAA lab in Seattle. I took it up myself to make sure it got there. And what was done there is they filter it, and then they collect it, get all the water out, and they filter it down so that it's just biological material that's left in there. And then they can use the analysis to provide a mitochondrial DNA sequence. So it's a genetic sequence of data that can be used to match, hopefully, to see if it matches any other populations. And there's like a bank that contains all these genetic sequences. And so you can say, yep, does it match that? You can't always get a whole full sequence. So sometimes you just have partial. And that's what happened to this. And so I will get to those results in a minute. And we also took acoustic recordings, or tried to, both my colleague Kathy King and Scott Beers. And so that was problem with that is we just heard ship noise. It was a very busy area down by Tacoma, Commencement Bay. It was on a weekday. So, you know, everybody's boating around. It was salmon season. Everybody's boating, trying to go salmon fishing. So it was a little bit of a challenge. So this is just some, so Scott Beers kindly put up some, every time we would get a sighting from Lisa and everybody at Orca Network or anybody in the public that reported it to Orca Network, to the sighting network, that would get a pin drop, and then we would put down, you know, where it's been. And so I have a couple of different slides that show, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the whole thing on there without just a bunch of dots sitting on top of each other, but you can see it actually showed up in Victoria also. When you look at the whole map, the different colors correspond to different weeks and different time periods, but it did spend most of its time down in southern Puget Sound. And here's a little blow up of the down here is Bainbridge Island here. There's Seattle, it would come across. It went to Bremerton one day, then it came back down. I forget what week the yellow was. It went down and spent more time down in Tacoma area. And then here's a little bit more of a close-up. It just, you know, tootled back and forth and spent right off of Discovery Park, but also in the Duwamish, probably finding fish there because there were a lot of fishermen off of this point here. So, you know, it goes where the food is and probably looking around different places. So what did we find? So the summary report here is as of 10/25, although we've had maybe a possible sighting, but the last unconfirmed sighting was October 14th, but the last, I'm sorry, this is a misnomer here. This is a misspelling. The second one line should read last confirmed sighting is near October. Wait, I think I have that right. Let me see here. Hang on one second. I should know this. I think our last confirmed was the 20th. If I'm wrong, when I get off of here, we can someone can correct me on that. I think it was the last confirmed sighting was October 20th near Dash Point. So what we did before we knew what the results were from the eDNA, the genetic sampling, is we had contingency plans in place, particularly if it was someone that we thought was from the Cook Inlet population, because we knew that if it was, this is an endangered animal. It's kind of very, very high priority. So we had, you know, teams together that were ready to go at a moment's notice. We had, you know, if it stranded live, we would know what to do. We had, if it was stranded dead, we would have necropsy protocols to follow to get the most information. And so we had these, you know, ready to go. And it was helpful. I mean, it was kind of a double-edged sword. The publicity, I kind of felt sorry for the whale because everybody's, you know, following it around, but it was helpful because it helped us get more sighting information to figure out where it was going. So the sampling, interestingly enough, was not a match for an endangered Cook Inlet beluga. They did not get a full sequence, but they got enough to at least rule out Cook Inlet. What they say is it's more likely an Arctic or Beaufort Sea animal. They don't know for sure if it's, you know, Arctic, I mean, Beluga, Beaufort, but they know it's somewhere up north of Alaska. And so again, as I mentioned, the last, let's see, I think I said 40,000 Beaufort. The last estimate that was a survey in 1992. They have done a 2019 survey, but the data is still being analyzed. So we don't yet know if that 40,000 is still going to stand in the Beaufort. Belugas in the Beaufort Sea population have been known to migrate between the United States, primarily Alaska, Western Canada, and Eastern Russian waters. So, you know, at this point, it appears this animals at least traveled thousands of miles from the Beaufort Sea down through, as you can see through this map, from here all the way around, has come through the, oops, sorry, she had here, all the way through the Alaska Peninsula, all the way down through the Gulf of Alaska, and then to get to Puget Sound, South Puget Sound. I mean, that to me is incredible. Why it's done it, if it's ill, we just don't know. The body condition of this animal, we assessed it was a little thin, but it wasn't like, you know, super skinny, dangerously skinny. But what it looks like now, we have no idea. We haven't seen it in a few weeks, almost a month now. So it remains to be seen if it's still there. If not, who knows? It's just very interesting. So what I do have now at the end of this slide, this presentation, is I have one recording and one video. One is a recording of what they sound like. They're called the canaries of the sea, and you'll see why. So we can listen to that. Let let's see if I can get, oh, there we go. Okay. So this is, because they produce many, many different sounds, you know, whistles, squeals, moos, chirps, and clicks. And they, you know, again, echolocate, and they've got great vision inside and out of water. So let me start this and we can listen to it. Okay, and the last one, so this kicks me out. Let's see if I can get to, oh yeah, here we go. So this will be just a few minutes. I'm going to try to, I'll share the screen, but I'm going to take it off presentation mode, because what we'll do is we can talk about, this is the video that King 5 shot of the whale. They took a video of the whale from the air on their helicopter on the 7th, which is the day that we were out. And I have to admit, if it hadn't been for them, we probably wouldn't have gotten as much sampling done on this animal, or at least observation, as we would have without them, because this guy was just popping up as like a whack-a-mole. Just, you know, we'd go to one location based on, you know, talking to Lisa, and oh, it's moved over here. And so it was really hard to follow. It was a beautiful sunny day. It was just, you know, we're like 3 little tiny boats in this big ocean and this thing running around. So we were able to locate the animal based on where the helicopter was. And so they just took some really great video of it. And what I'm gonna try to do is, let me stop. Well, let me see if I can get it going here, and then I'll go to some of the good parts, and then we can talk. And the water was beautiful. It was just super clear. Let's see, and of course they filmed. Oh, okay, let me get out presentation mode, and then I'll put it up here. Let's see. How am I going to do this? Well, it's not going to let me do that. I apologize. If you go look up, if you go and look up YouTube, King 5 Beluga Whale on YouTube, you can see the video. It's like 43 minutes long, and you have to fast forward through some of it. But there's just really, really gorgeous aerial footage of the animal, and the water's really clear, and you can see the bubbles blowing. So I highly recommend it if you you know, want to see what they look like from the air, and really beautiful blue water. The water was super calm. So, and that's it for my side.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. And we have a lot of questions for you in the chat.
Okay, go ahead.
People come
I
up with
don't know if I can answer them all, but go ahead.
Well, about this whale specifically, people were wondering if it was an adult and if you were able to determine the sex of the whale.
That's a good question. We were not able to determine, at least visually, from where we were seeing it. And from the animals I've seen in Alaska, this animal did not look big enough to be an adult. I think it was more of a subadult, and it wasn't as white. I mean, it looks white there, but when you see it closer up, it's not as spectacularly crystal flashy white as you see. So I would say it's probably a subadult, almost an adult. With the DNA sample, the eDNA, they might be able to get a sex on it. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about it. Maybe someone else has, but yeah, I haven't heard anything. So I don't know.
And then I at least was surprised when you put that sightings map up that it had been seen kind of near Victoria, and it looked like there was a Harrow Strait sighting as well. So did some earlier sightings come in from before that original video, or?
Yeah, well, they didn't, but Scott recreated the map, because after it became public and then hit the news, he had talked to someone or someone had reported from Canada. We were pretty sure we saw it. It was white, and they knew what they were talking about. So we're suspicious that it was up there first, and then finally came down, into our area. But the last I heard, I think it was out, like swimming out straight along to Fuca, like following killer whales. You know, I'm really surprised that, because up in Cook Inlet, that is a #1 threat to the Cook Inlet belugas as far as predators go. I mean, they will go right, like literally in water that is maybe a foot deep, because that is the way they avoid killer whales. And you know, we have so many big killer whales around here that to me, it's really surprises me. Either he's not aware or he's naive to that, or I don't know. So I hope he didn't get, you know, I don't know. I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, he's over, but you know, where all these killer whales are and what's going to happen. But yeah.
Let's see here. Somebody had asked near the beginning, do females tend to live longer than males, or is there any difference between the sexes there?
They do, not by a whole lot, but they do. They tend to be, when I said 90, those are the females we're talking about. The males, typically, they have, and the way they know this is they've aged teeth. Also, they've been able to look at the ovaries of females that either stranded or hunted by the native communities, and they can look at how many pregnancies they've had. But it's easier looking at the teeth. And so I think, I want to say it was like 60 something for a male. I don't remember the highest record was, but they had I had a 90, I think a 90-year-old female. So not very many of them, but yeah.
Yeah. Do different populations have different acoustic dialects?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I would think so, but I don't know. Because I mean, our orcas do, but well, that's a good one. I just don't know enough about acoustics to know.
That's okay.
Yeah.
A couple of people commented when you showed the range map, were there any theories about the distribution in the Atlantic and why they're maybe not more widely spread in the North Atlantic?
To me, it's the food. So, and also the temperature. There have been some sightings of belugas that have come down. There was one in Boston Harbor a few years ago, but they tend to stay up in really, you know, cold Arctic based on their food preferences. They just have been adapted to living in icy conditions. And so really the Cook Inlet ones and the St. Lawrence estuary, those are the most southern. Those are what we call the subarctic populations, but everybody else is, there just tend to be fewer populations in the Arctic, I mean, the Atlantic, than there are, you know, say around the Pacific. Yeah.
Were Cook Inlet belugas ever captured for marine parks?
Not that I know of, not purposely, no. Most of the belugas that have been captured, and you probably heard about in the news maybe 2 or 3 years ago, have come from Russia. And they had the big capture where they had them out in the pen and they were not doing very well. And they also had orcas in there. So at least as the past few decades, they've come from Russia, but you know, there are a lot of efforts. And there's also the new sanctuary that's opened up in Newfoundland on the east coast of Canada, where it's going to house the ones that came, the formerly captive animals that came in from China. So that will be a really neat thing to see how that works out for them. Yeah, because they're highly intelligent too. Like, I don't know if they're up in the levels of orcas, but they're pretty smart.
What type of markings do you look for to identify individuals, since they don't have dorsal fins or saddle patches?
That's a good, yeah. I'm talking to Tamara McGuire, who has led that up in Alaska. It's really any scars, or if they've had a, you know, particular shape of ridge, but primarily it's either coloration or scarring. Now the problem with that, though, as if they shed, they molt, sometimes those scars can fade and go away. So they have to sort of, you know, be able to look at them every year to look and see if as things, yes, and some scars have disappeared or have lightened. Some animals have gotten new injuries. So it's difficult. It's not as easy as, say, looking at orcas. And, you know, there was a lot of doubt about whether that could be done early on, but you know, they've done it. So it's, you know, it's a small population compared to, say, doing something with the the animals in Russia where there's, thousands of them. It would be a lot, or even Beaufort Sea. But yeah, scarring is a big one, and coloration, and any kind of weird, injuries to the ridge, like maybe a divot or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. What does cumulative effects mean as a threat to the Cook Inlet belugas?
Good question. So, we know that everything is not, we talk about things like pollution and noise and decrease in prey. Things aren't mutually exclusive. So what has been hard to, even in looking at orcas, what's really been hard to determine is what proportion do each of those factors play, and how do they interact with each other? So really, and what happens over time as they accumulate, things accumulate. So when a calf is born, the mom, passes along the contaminants that she's accumulated over her lifetime. But then what happens to those in the calf? What happens to the male calves that can't offload them to their calves in the future? And then, with those contaminants in their body, then what happens when they are stressed by noise or there's not enough food? So the cumulative effects are when you start piling on these different factors, what is that overall, what's the overall effect on these populations? And you can't just look at pollution and nothing else. You can't look at noise and nothing else. It's all related. It's like a big Venn diagram. It's like this, it's kind of like those aerial survey tracks there I showed you in the map in Alaska. It's like all over. And there are modelers that have, statistical modelers that have started to do that, and at least in orcas, and hopefully that can provide sort of a template so that we can do it in other populations that are facing similar types of challenges. That's a great question.
Yeah. You mentioned belugas being tagged. Are those with suction cup tags or with dart tags, or?
It depends on how long and what we're looking for. So if the researcher wants to know just some very brief information, going from point A to point B within a small area, or just wants a short, several day, or maybe a few hours, they can put the suction cup tags. But to really get an idea of how far they go, where they're going to feed, how long, get several months of data, they put in these Teflon tags that are like this long, like maybe, I don't know if you guys can see me here, about 6-8 inches long, maybe 10 inches long. And the interesting thing, when we have the Bristol Bay animals, that population is healthy and growing. When those animals were pulled out, what they were most sensitive to, because remember we had to put them through the ridge, but remember the ridge is also used to crash through ice. So it's used to bust up through an ice flow, and to make a hole to breathe in. So it has to be really tough and be sort of, not say insensitive to pain, but to really stick up to hard, rough surfaces. And so when we had to put little small holes in there to put the tag through, because that's what the satellite tag was anchored onto. And so the tag was put on top of the ridge, and it was cushioned so it wouldn't rub on the animal's ridge and cause like a sore. And then the 2 bolts were put in, and then to that the wires from the tag were attached. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of it, but what that did is they didn't really react to that. Usually you see them, but what they did react to the most was when we try to draw blood with a teeny tiny little needle, on a big fluke, which is, half the size of me. And you would think that we, had stabbed them with a knife. It was just a teeny tiny, and boy, their skin is super sensitive. But that ridge, interestingly enough, was pretty tough. And they just sat there. And so, because, as a veterinarian, we're there to make sure that the animal is not harmed. There's, protocols we have to follow. And, if they react and it, it stresses them out, then we can't, keep them out of the water for very long. So it's very interesting to see how the the bolts that we put in, they're 2 small ones, didn't really move, but go to draw blood and a teeny needle, they just lost it. So yeah, very interesting.
That is really interesting. And
yeah.
I guess I didn't realize, but it makes sense that these tags were deployed when you captured these animals. So that, how did you do that? And I guess that opens up a lot more options because they're a smaller cetacean as opposed to when larger whales are tagged.
Yeah, it was challenging because we weren't allowed to do that with Cook Inlet anymore. So that I think the last captures were back in 2000, I want to say. But in the Bristol Bay, we definitely utilized the native knowledge because they hunt them. The Bristol Bay animals are hunted, not a lot of them, but a few. And so we brought them with us, and went out in several boats. We had a big purse seine net, and the belugas, because that population, the Bristol Bay, are hunted, they know not to poke their heads out too much out of the water because the hunters would see them. I mean, the hunters are telling us all this, and we're like, how are we going to capture these animals? Oh my goodness. And we had several boats, we had the net around them, and it's like a purse seine, it just slowly comes in. And then very experienced animal handlers from Aquaria were there, and also the local natives would help us. And so the animal would be brought in a net, and we would pull it along into the water, making sure, of course, it can breathe and it's doing okay that way, able to get air. And then we would walk it in, and remembering this is really thick, silty mud, and we always had to be aware. Someone always had to be watching to see when the tides. We always knew when the tides were coming in. We had to be careful these animals didn't roll. We had a couple times that people got their legs stuck underneath because you're trying to keep this animal from moving around. But so there's like 10 people, 5 or 6 people on each side trying to hold it steady. So it doesn't move as much, and you get a leg stuck under there and it decides to roll, it can just snap it, but luckily it didn't happen. But once they had calmed down, which was not too long after they were brought into shallower water, we kept them in there so they could at least have some buoyancy. And then we kept them, all procedures, the whole thing start to finish was under an hour. And then once the tide came back in, we would put, if the tide wasn't coming back in for a little bit, we would just pull them out and then let them go that way. So it was challenging. It was very tiring. I mean, we worked during the summer, so that was 12-hour days because it's sunny to sun, and we would sometimes come back at 9 o'clock at night and it's still sunny out. So, but we would sometimes just do 2 animals, but it took that long to find them, that long to get them. It's exhausting work because you're fighting the mud and trying to, and I'm not very tall. It's up to my, up to the top of my legs most of the time. And it's cold, so you're out there and you have to avoid predators like grizzly bears, and so it's a challenge. I mean, it took place several years. I think the last, I can't remember the last few years. I didn't go in the last few years, but I did the early ones. But we started in 2008 and did 2008, 10, and 12, I want to say. But very interesting, very very unusual looking animals, but they calmed down. They just pretty much sat there after until you took their blood, and then they'd calm down again. So, and we did blood part of my PhD work was to look at stress hormones before, as soon as we caught them, we let them calm down for a second, we drew blood. And then after we did all the procedures, doing ultrasound on them, putting the tag on, doing blowhole samples, then we would take the blood again to see if there was a change. And remarkably, their stress hormones would go down during, by the end of the procedure. So it was very, not say it was stress-free, because the capture itself is probably not fun, scary thing for them, but it was interesting to see how they adapted pretty readily. Now, things like Dahl's porpoises, which are like a chihuahua of the dolphin world, they're always shaky. You wouldn't want to do that, but these are sort of like I call them the labs of the world. They're kind of excited at first, and then they just sort of settle down and lay there. But yeah, very, very neat animals, very neat species.
That's amazing. Here's a really great question. Do we know why belugas are white?
I have no clue. I think it's because they live in the ice and they need to be able to blend in, because polar bears will also try to can grab them and capture them. Because remember, they have to use their ridge to pop open a breathing hole sometimes. And who's waiting up there is going to be a polar bear. So I would say it's because of the ice. Now the Cook Inlet, they live in ice too. They don't have the polar bears there, but this may help them camouflage against killer whales. So,
and is there any known reason why the babies are dark?
I asked someone that, and what they think, and again, this is just a theory, is that if something's going to come up from underneath to eat it. So if you look at the bottom of the beluga underneath, or anything really like a surfboard or anything, it's darker on the bottom. And so if the baby is right next to the mom underneath. Anything that's coming up from underneath is going to just, see something dark. I'm not saying it's protecting them, but it's going to see something dark. What's happened in because of the ice melting up in Canada, there were nurseries of narwhals and beluga whales that would go up there during the summertime, but because of the ice, the killer whales couldn't get in. And then what happened with the ice melting, climate change, the killer whale, some smart killer whale figured out that, oh my goodness, look what's here's a bag of potato chips sitting in a cove, and they would wipe out entire groups of mom nurseries. And so then the killer whale went and taught its young, and so now they've got killer whales coming up and picking off these narwhal nurseries and beluga nurseries. So that's kind of the thing with climate change. I kind of jumped to that because I had just remembered it was such an example, a glaring example of what happens when things change. And if the ice disappears, how are these animals going to camouflage themselves? So things to think about. Yeah.
Do we know if belugas go through menopause?
Yeah, it is suspected, because I know my colleague and I got some questions about that when the article came out about the orcas. There is some suspicion, but I don't think it's been shown. I don't know, actually. I know that they were asking, so the reporters were asking about belugas, but I do not know for sure, 100%.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Questions keep coming in here. So if the Puget Sound whale had been a Cook Inlet animal, what would have changed in terms of response plan?
Well, we would have had probably, either more boats out looking for it, or I don't know. It was really if it was to live strand or to dead strand. I know there was, I don't know if there was talk about intervening, but it's really hard because it's swimming around all over the place. It's not going one place. So I think it would have been really difficult to do anything unless it was really in trouble, like it was super thin. Maybe there would have been an intervention. It was never said because once we found out it wasn't a Cook Inlet animal, but I know there were contingencies if it live stranded that it would definitely be taken back up, put somewhere to treat and assess, and then potentially move back up to Cook Inlet if it's stranded. If it was a dead stranded, then certainly it would have been a very in-depth necropsy. But if it would have remained healthy, it's just so difficult to be able to, capture them. And you don't want to, if it's healthy and swimming around and maintaining its weight, then you don't want to sit there and start trying to capture it, stress it out, and then say, okay, we're going to drop you off back up here. I think it was more of a contingency if it was ill, not doing well, losing obvious weight. There would have been a huge effort to get more photo ID and more sampling potentially, to see. So, yeah.
I'll just read this one here. So it says,
real quick, I'm sorry. Thanks, Elisa. So Lisa Schulman Janiger said, yes, narwhals and belugas do go through menopause. Thank you for that.
No, good.
So I just saw it pop up in the chat.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So this one says, it looked like prey availability for Cook Inlet belugas was not considered as high of a priority as other impacts. But as I understand, NOAA has included in their recovery plan an allocation of salmon for Cook Inlet belugas. Is that correct?
An allocation as in like they don't, like they're saving part of this runs, or?
I think so. Yeah, I think I remember reading something about that as well with the Alaskan Department of Fish and Wildlife, like actually designating some of the fish for the belugas. And that's, of course, an interesting topic of conversation as it relates to the southern residents down here and doing something similar.
Yeah, I don't know honestly about that. I mean, I don't know anything about it, so I haven't heard. Like I said, I haven't been keeping up track with Alaska ones as much as I had as far as the day in and day out intricacies of it. But to me, that sounds like a great idea. So I know that the Yulacon, so when they come back from the winter, to the mouths of the Susitna River, the big deltas that they get their salmon from, before the salmon arrive, the Yulacon come in. And so these animals will come in and feed, the belugas will feed heavily on the Yulacon. And so they're an important component, at least their spring diet, as they wait and before the salmon come in. And once the salmon come in, that's where they tend to really, bulk up and get their blubber layer and help to support them through the summer and then the rest of the year. But I know that the Eulachon, at least when I was doing the work up there, that there were some issues with, how healthy were the stocks there? Are they in trouble? And there's just not as much information on the stocks of Eulachon as there was on, say, the salmon. So there's probably going to be more, looking at the Eulachon too and what role they play, because it's not just salmon. I mean, they do rely on other types of fish, but salmon is the big one, as it is for orcas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do belugas exhibit a visible blow like other whales?
They do. It's small, like really small, but it's not nearly like when we were up in Alaska. If it was calm and the water's really murky and silty there, so it's kind of nice that they contrast so nicely and it's a little bit more visible there. But when we were out there on the 7th, even though it was a calm day, it was still, we just weren't close enough to see it. If you're close enough, you'll see it, but you won't see it from a distance, not like you do with the killer whales.
And somebody says, what inspired your love for whales and what led you to study belugas?
Well, interestingly, so I grew up in Dallas, and so I wasn't really near an ocean, but I certainly visited aquaria, which was really my first introduction to them. So I kind of have, ironically, to thank our nearest, it was called Seven Seas, which it's no longer around, hasn't been for decades. But so instead of having like boy bands posters on my walls when I was a teenager, I had, Jacques Cousteau, and I had whales, and I had, dolphin pictures. And that was what, so for an early age, I wanted to do that. And when I moved out to California, I just got involved in marine mammals after vet school. And then I moved up here. And what really got me into the belugas was because I was doing contract work for NOAA. And the person that was running the kind of the beluga program at the time at the Marine Mammal Lab in Sandpoint Way, up in Seattle. So just my work was already, I was already doing work with belugas. And so it just sort of segued into that. And they said, we haven't really done it from an epidemiological perspective. So epidemiology is essentially looking at factors that either make a population more susceptible to disease or, make it more resistant or unlikely to get a disease. So it's like public health for animals, for populations. So, you can look at individual animals as a clinical veterinarian or a human doctor, but then if you want to know like how those individual animals impact a population's health, that goes to epidemiology. So it started out from epidemics, and that's where that word comes from. And that was like back in the days of the plague and when things were, it used to be like infectious diseases in the beginning in the 1800s, but now it's a lot of chronic things, at least for humans, chronic diseases, but we do still do that in animals too. So, yeah. And so I just kind of started doing beluga stuff. And then I moved, I finished my PhD and now I do mostly local species here, harbor porpoises in particular.
Awesome. Was there any discussion about the possibility that this could have been a military beluga?
Yeah, we kind of wondered that. It just wasn't displaying behavior that was friendly, in other words, like anthropomorphized, like that one that was found, who was it, in Russia, Norway? That animal had very peculiar behaviors. And we thought for a minute, like we were like, the first couple of days that we saw this animal was reported, we're like, is anyone out doing, the Navy exercises like they would tell you anyway? So we didn't think that was the case because there really were no other boats in the area. And typically they're going to at least they won't let their animal go that far away. They're expensive animals and they're not, there's usually going to be a boat around, but we didn't see anybody. So we finally came to the conclusion just based on the way it's moving around and it's just sort of all over the place. And it was really not letting people get close to it. That's probably, it was not a military animal, but it did cross our mind.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it was kind of seeking out the busy areas as well. Mm-hmm. So, going into the shipyards and stuff like that, I think a lot of people were wondering.
Yeah, is it like noise? But I think that's where the salmon were because that's where all the little fishing boats were too. So
it was the thought that because they're such kind of generalist feeders that it would be able to find something to eat if it stayed in Puget Sound?
Well, I mean, it could technically. I mean, it's got everything it needs. It doesn't freeze over. It could potentially live here if it, I guess, if it wanted to, as long as there's quote nothing wrong with it. Physically, because we worry about things like neurological issues such as harmful algal blooms. There's one that's called domoic acid where it affects part of their brain that affects memory. So the sea lions in California have gotten affected by it, where they may wander off somewhere and not remember where they are or not realize where they are. So, not saying it's completely healthy. We just assume it is, but we'll see. I mean, unless it shows up somewhere or we never see it again, which is often the case. Like the one in San Diego, though, unfortunately, they weren't able to tell where it was from, because when it finally did, we think it was the same one that showed up dead. The one that was in San Diego showed up in dead in Mexico, but it was reported by a fisherman, and I don't think it was able to be found, and no one did a necropsy on it, so it was never identified where it came from. So that's even further south. Where that animal come from, we'll never know. So
yeah, super interesting. And thank you so much for sharing all of this with us and answering all these questions. It's clearly a topic everyone has a lot of interest in, and it's an unknown species to many of us here. I think I got most of the questions in the chat. I was kind of trying to keep an eye on both things here. So I don't know if anybody else has a dying question. Feel free to unmute and kind of ask that question directly if I missed something you were dying to know.
Yes, here's one that says, but aren't they very social? Yes, they are. And that's a good point, is can it survive on its own? I mean, the social aspect is what helps them a lot, because they get protection in numbers. But it's a big unknown. We really have no idea if an individual animal could survive. I don't know. It just depends on, to know like what's going on with it. Is it really sick? It'd be nice to get like a blow sample. We just can't get close to it enough. Even like getting a drone out there with a little, like they do with the large whales, to be able to get a sample of the blow, but the blow's so tiny, you have to get so low to it that I think it would just scare it and go back underwater, and it'd be tough to do. So maybe something like a fecal sample might be good, but even so, their feces are real watery, and it breaks up really easily in the water, unlike the orca feces, which is can be a little bit easier to grab a hold of. But beluga poop is pretty watery in comparison. So lots of challenges.
Can I just say something about the dates and the sightings?
Yeah.
You're totally correct on that. The 14th is when it was heading out. It was J-Pod that was heading out.
Okay.
And that one was the latest, most viable one. And then a week later, that one came in on the 20th off Dash Point. That person never followed up. So that one does remain pretty much unconfirmed.
Okay, so the 14th was the last confirmed. Okay, I had that wrong.
Well, it wasn't photo confirmed, but the person seemed pretty solid on that one. We did get a report. I got a call 2 days ago, and so it was great you were talking about the blow, because she talked about seeing a whale, but it really, the way she described it, it sounded like a gray. And when I asked her if it could be a gray, she said, yeah, it could be, I guess. And she did say she saw a tall blow, so you kind of confirmed more what I was thinking, that it was a gray whale, and there is one hanging around. So it does look like 20th was the last unconfirmed, and 14th is probably the most reliable.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you did a great job, because I know it was crazy that day on the 7th, and it was just the calls, and then finally the King 5 were like, oh, okay, well, I guess the King 5 copter is going to help us, because I mean, we've been out there all day looking for it. And I found it at 12 noon, and then we didn't really get to it, good views of it, until like 2 or 3 o'clock. It was just all over the place. So yeah, it's a tough area. It was a very busy area, lots of boats going around, large ships. And so yeah, it takes a village, but I hope it's gone back. That's what I hope for it, but I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell. And I did forget to mention, I should have done that, darn it. The last sighting was in 1940, down the same area. There was a beluga reported in 1940 down by Discovery Park. So same general area. Yeah.
How bizarre is that?
I know, it's like that many years later. It's 80 years later. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are weird, and we had a ribbon seal from the Arctic a few years ago here. So, and they've had the walrus in the UK for a while, but you know, that animal didn't, I mean, it's far down, but it's not as far as going from the Arctic down here. I mean, the distance is a lot longer, and the things they have to go through, and the animals they have to get past to like all the killer whales in Alaska, but they're mammal eaters, a lot of those guys. And so I don't know how he gets past all those that hang out in the Gulf of Alaska. I don't know. He got lucky or something, or it did. Yeah, so who knows?
Yeah, I was going to say time will tell, but it may not. We may never know.
Yeah.
It's one of those things.
Yeah, it was neat. It was good, something fun to deal with in October. So yeah, this has been great. This is really a neat. I didn't catch the first part about the. So how long have you guys been doing these meetings? Did it just start, or?
Yeah, this is our launch event right here. You were
Oh, there we go. Okay, hopefully I didn't put everybody to sleep. Well,
no,
let's get good feedback.
A lot of thank yous coming in the chat.
Yeah, well, great. Usually I'm talking to like 4 people or 5, but this is nice to have so many people interested. But yeah, you guys got some really good presentations coming up. So that'll be a really nice, broad, you know, good mix of topics and different things to talk about here. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and for everyone in the audience who participated and joined us tonight as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.
All right,
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
All right, great. Have a good holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Stephanie. Bye.
Bye.